coming to Cracking the Non-Alcoholic Code, Tales of the Cocktail. Today we will be, we have Dave Arnold, James Beard Award-winning author, formerly of the, or still currently Dean of the French Culinary Institute?
No
idea. But lover of luchador. Myself, I'm Don Lee, formerly of the Tales of the Cocktail Apprentice program, currently on the grants committee, do a bunch of other stuff. I like Star Wars stuff. That's actually me under that Stormtrooper outfit.
Which you built, right?
Which I built, and I don't suggest you do it. It's very expensive and time consuming. With us is Robert Murphy, fried chicken aficionado, formerly of Next, Millennia, former cook, former Tales Apprentice, and currently the Beverage Director at Existing Conditions. If you would like to contact any of us, here's our information. I'll put it up again at the end of the seminar. So the first cocktail that you'll be receiving, to give you a heads up, is this cocktail. We're going to come back and explain it in detail, but just know that this is the first cocktail that you're going to get. And we're going to, we would like you to take a sip immediately when it comes, then just put it down and wait. Give it 15 minutes and then take another sip. So we're just preceding that. This slides can come back again if you missed this photo. So you may have heard of us because we currently opened a bar about a year ago called Existing Conditions. Existing Conditions is an architectural term about what you find in the space before you build around it, and we try to, take that idea and turn that into a bar. And we have a bar manual that we give all of our employees, and in it we thought really deeply about things like what our drinks should be like. And so we are very different from other bars, and I don't suggest you do this because it's a huge pain in the ass. Instead of like any normal person coming to the bar and looking at your back bar and saying, oh, look at all these amazing products that people have already made for us, and then mixing them into something new and delicious, which is easy and fast and reproducible, we have decided to go out of our way to go out into the world, find inspiration in something, come back, create new ingredients that don't exist, and then try to create a cocktail out of that. So all of our cocktails start with a problem. It's the thing that keeps you up at night after you've tasted something at a restaurant. It's the thing that you're trying to, how do I explain this concept to somebody else? It's the spoiler from the end of the movie Ratatouille, where the evil critic tastes the ratatouille and then is reminded of their childhood. How do you do that in a cocktail is essentially what we're trying to do. Don't spend your life doing that. It's really difficult. Do not recommend. So there are many great drinks out there, but most of them do not work for us because they do not follow our house style. So we really try to embody this, what is our house style and how do we make something that is unique to us. And for that challenge, the thing that keeps us up at night when we think about non-alcoholic cocktails, and we hate the term mocktail. Why would you mock people? Don't mock people, right? So we call it non-alcoholic cocktails. The challenge is, how do you make a non-alcoholic cocktail that drinks like an alcoholic drink? So you all mostly drink non-alcoholic drinks. So the speed at which you drink water is different from the speed at which you drink Coca-Cola or a soda. It's different from the way that you drink coffee. And it's very different from the way you drink an alcoholic drink. You don't slam, or you shouldn't slam, unless you're this guy, cocktails in the way that you, would drink water if you're very thirsty on a hot day, right? You don't drink sparkling wine in the way that you would sip on a Negroni on the rocks. There's just a way that you drink them that is different. And we are trying to make non-alcoholic drinks that you end up drinking because of what's in the glass, what is intrinsic to that drink itself as you experience it like an alcoholic drink. So that is the challenge that we have set for ourselves. Again, I don't recommend it. It's a real pain in the ass. but that is what we're here to discuss today. So most of you know this idea of the Mr. Potato Head. This is a picture from the Death and Company book. Phil Ward coined this term in terms of the formula for classic cocktails, or classic formula-derived cocktails. So a sour in the traditional format, many of you think of it as the 2 ounces of alcohol, 3/4 of an ounce of something acidic, 3/4 of an ounce of something sweet. So, you know, that's the daiquiri, that's a margarita, that's a sidecar. It follows that formula for Mr. Potato Head. Once again, the drink you're getting right now is the Serendipity. Take a sip now, wait 15 minutes, and we'll take another sip.
Just don't drink it all right now.
Don't drink it all right now. Don't slam it. So, in the Mr. Potato Head model, there's all these components, and you're following this structure. Before we get into the non-alcoholic cocktail, I would like you to consider, and I assume that many of you have already purchased Liquid Intelligence, James Beard Award-winning book by the James Beard Award-winning author Dave Arnold. And if you look at page 128, there's this graphic, this chart. And I found, before we started working together, this was the most important thing in the book. The technique's important, but this is a way of thinking about cocktails that I've never seen. This is as important, and I would say more important, than the Mr. Potato Head model. So, Dave, if you could explain what you did here and how this is your version of Mr. Potato Head for alcoholic cocktails.
Right. So, you know, obviously everyone knew about the Mr. Potato Head because we were all talking about it. And then when I was writing the book, I decided to actually try to quantify because a lot of my recipes were big batch recipes. Because remember, I didn't come from bar world. I came from the French Culinary Institute, where my average cocktail was made 50. So I come from batch. I don't come from bar, I come from batch. And so all my recipes were rather large, and so I could deal in strange increments. So when I was working on carbonated beverages, I wanted to kind of quantify how I was writing the recipes. And so I started taking notes. Okay, this is exactly how much sugar is in this recipe. This is exactly how much acid is in this recipe. This is exactly how much water. It's just all of that. And then, and the carbonation chapter is actually the first chapter of the book I wrote. I spent all my time carbonating. So I started compiling this, and I was like, wait, I don't think anyone's actually compiled this stuff for regular cocktails, because people who are making cocktails, they think of acid and citrus, but they're not accounting for the acid that's in wine, and they're using vermouths. They're not accounting for any of those acids. They're accounting for sugar in the form of simple syrup, but they're only kind of mentally accounting for the sugar in, let's say, Dolin Blanc or in a liqueur. So I said, well, what if I actually calculate all of these numbers and then correlate it to how much water is added in the process of making the cocktail? Will I get anything that makes sense? And yeah, you do. You know, and different drinks have different structures based on what temperature at which they're drunk, how long it takes you to drink them, whether they're served with ice on them or not. What their dilution is and their temperature, so that everything kind of fit into this pattern. And it's very hard to make new drink styles because we're so ingrained to like these kinds of, or we're used to or like these certain patterns. So breaking this pattern mold is hard, but if you follow the pattern mold, you can do weird things as long as you hit something that's in one of the patterns.
So to explain this chart, there's actually 2 circles for each drink. So each of the text, which you can't read because it's tiny, just go back and look at it in your book eventually, is the name of a cocktail. There is a darker line circle, and then there is a colored in circle. Sometimes the line is outside of the circle, sometimes it's inside, sometimes it's right on the edge. You can see that, right? So the different colors are different the way that you would think of families of drinks. So shaken versus stirred versus on the rocks, egg white drinks, blender drinks, carbonated drinks. And the chart goes up and down. So what is this scale? Is the ABV. So the higher up these dots are, that's the ABV of the drink. The inner circle is the percentage of acidity, and then the colored circle is the amount of sugar. So here in all these cocktails, you can see the relationship between the ABV the amount of sugar and the amount of acidity. And by doing the math that only Dave Arnold would do, you can see that these families of cocktails, as we already, naturally think about cocktails, fall into this pattern, and they do fall into these families. So when we say we're going to try to crack the code to non-alcoholic cocktails, hypothetically, there must be something like this for non-alcoholic cocktails. And unfortunately, I don't have an exact answer for you yet. But that is the challenge that we've set for ourselves and that we are working towards. And so we're going to show you 3 different cocktails that we currently serve, non-alcoholic cocktails at existing conditions, and talk about the things that are like alcoholic cocktails that we are trying to address in these drinks. So the first drink that you're having now, this drink, we are trying to make something that drinks like an old-fashioned, right? How do you drink an old-fashioned? You drink an old-fashioned over time. It's not a drink that you slam immediately. The point is to watch that drink dilute over time and change over time, right? And so if you took this drink as we gave it to you now and you slammed the whole thing, you could have just been like, oh, that's a weird, fruity kind of thing. I've never had something like that before. But what we hope to demonstrate is the change over time of this drink. So it's been about, we served this at 1:08. It's about 1:15 now. It's been about 7 minutes. So imagine if you'd gotten an old-fashioned, let it sit for 7 minutes, what would it taste like? And so if you taste this drink now, what does it taste like? Did it change over time? What is it like?
It also dilutes slower at the bar because we're on one big rock at the bar, and so inherently in an environment like this, you're going to get a faster dilution rate, just FYI.
Right. The other thing that you have with an old-fashioned is, as it's diluting, you're changing the ABV, you're changing the amount of sugar that is in it, and what does that do? It changes the texture of that drink. Sometimes when you get an old-fashioned, it's not diluted enough. It's actually a little warm, right? It's a little harsher. And then by the time you get to the very end of it, it's too diluted. But it's about that experience of that drink over time. And depending on who you ask, like perhaps a Robert Simonson type person or a Dave Wonder type person, a lot of drinkers prefer an old-fashioned where you don't use simple syrup, but you actually muddle sugar into it. Because to them, part of that experience is getting an old-fashioned with some sugar on the bottom, not completely dissolved in yet, and then watching it change over time. Now, aesthetically, you can say that that's the type of old-fashioned you like or you don't like, but that is one of the reasons why they like that old-fashioned. So an old-fashioned is a drink that shows time and texture in a way that you don't normally think about in, let's say, a daiquiri. If you let a daiquiri sit for too long, it just becomes bad, right? It just becomes warm. So how do you create a drink that shows, a non-alcoholic drink, that shows time and texture? Well, so this is the closest thing to an old-fashioned we came up with, and Bobby came up with this. Bobby actually came up with most of these non-alcoholic drinks. So do you want to talk a little about how do you come up with this combination and why does this work?
Well, for me, passion fruit necessarily wasn't an agent that came to mind, but most of the drinks I make and most of the things I do, it's exactly finding a distinct purpose, finding an ingredient, working with it. But this kind of goes back to just moments of my grandmother. We were clarifying some tomato juice one day, and I was like, wow, I just remember my grandmother making tomato jam in the day. And you always have to acidify it at some point when you're making a jam. So it came to me, we had some passion fruit around, and then I kind of looked it up, and it's a very classic, London style combination. You see it all over the place. So it's got a bright enough acidity to it. The tomato juice is adding this giant body to it. The simple syrup, you just need to cut that acidity in general. But the idea was it just tastes so good together. It plays off each other so well. The acidity and the savoriness is what you get in the embodiment of finding acidity after you're adding something to an old-fashioned, like your citrus, your peels. But the tomato juice, even though it's not a direct correlation of wood or any of that parts, it's a depth and flavor that's very savory. So those are the two things that we thought kind of really, really work together. never crossed our minds to like put it into a sparkling application or anything of that sort. It just felt like it was big, rich enough. And again, we argue all the time at the bar, like, do you serve an old fashioned that's a little bit hot, and then you get that, you know, perfect drink? And some people, yeah, we're not.
Don't start.
But there's the ideology of like having something that's like perfectly served to you, so you know you get your drink running your old fashioned. It's like that first sip is really beautiful and really wonderful, but then it sits for that 7 minutes, and then it's like, wow, it's so watered down drink. So this is one of the ones that like we let sit. We always do when we have our tests that we do on making any kind of drink. How does it taste after 20 minutes? So even after we over diluted this one, after 20 minutes, it's still a pretty good drink.
I mean, the other thing is, like, you can't taste it raw, but if you tasted it, when I say raw, not on a rock, right, Bobby? It takes extremely high viscosity, extremely high
Huge.
viscosity. The tomato juice has a very high viscosity, higher than the sugar amount in it. It also has a lot of sugar, which brings a lot of viscosity, and glycerin, which we'll talk about later. So it's just like, most fruit juice-based things get their viscosity from having a bunch of actual solids in it. This is a straight liquid, clear, high viscosity thing. So I think one of the reasons it works so well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, glycerin we'll get to in a second. For those of you, if you don't know, saline, when we talk about it, we're talking about a 20% solution. So that means 20 grams of salt and 20 milliliters of water. The nice thing about the metric system, 1 milliliter of water is 1 gram of water, so you get a 20% by weight solution. Does this make sense to everyone? Yes? Move on. Okay, so is everyone clear on clarification? When we say clarify things, everyone understands what we're talking about? No? Okay, so we're talking a little bit about clarification. So, clarifying something does not mean making it colorless, just putting that out there up front. So I'm now going to unleash the Dave Arnold explain clarification.
In a minute and a half. Go.
And here's all the different techniques you need to go over.
Okay, so the thing is, a lot of people, especially in this kind of a non-alc, right? First of all, clarifying is taking all of the solids out. So anything that is not soluble, right? So like you're not taking salt out with clarification because that's actually like dissolved in the drink. But if you have salt and then like let's say some other crap in there that makes it cloudy, like I don't know, some kind of rocks, sand, like getting rid of that would be clarifying, right? So clarifying is removing things that aren't technically dissolved; they're suspended into the product. Now, anytime you clarify something, you're doing a number of things. One, removing the solids removes the flavor that those solids have. Sometimes that's a huge positive because sometimes solids taste real bad. Like for instance, like tomato skins actually don't taste good. We can fight about it. I'll win. They taste bad. What else? The actual seed parts of strawberries taste bad, real bad. I've eaten spoonfuls of just those little seeds on the outside because I have centrifuge. They taste real bad. The other thing is that you're turning something that was kind of gloppy into something that is pourable, right? Something that is clear. And if you're serving someone an old-fashioned and you serve them a glass of goop, you haven't served them an old-fashioned. You served them a glass of goop on a rock, which is not the same. It's not the same. It's not the same thing. So for clarifying, you do it for a number of reasons. One, because I would not want something not clarified in this scenario. It's just not the way that cocktail should look. It affects the flavor. What else? If you're going to carbonate, which we're going to talk about later, it stops there from being a bunch of nucleation sites. You know, so you never have us do one of those Bellinis that turns into like a nightmare of foam. And anyway, and you know those are really the only reasons. Flavor, right? Flavor, texture, the way it looks, and also your yields are really high. So let's say in terms of clarifying a juice versus like smashing it into a drink. If you're smashing fruit into a drink, most of that is probably going to get tossed into your sink, and even if it ends up in their glass, it's probably going to be dumped out with the ice after they dump it out. You know, how much of that muddled fruit crap that you see thrown away? All of it. You know what I mean? So like if you clarify that juice for a high value target like, you know, berries, then you can get almost all of the flavor out and actually have it end up in the drink instead of down the drain.
What I like to tell people too is like, as crazy as all that just sounds, using a centrifuge, everyone in this room has used a centrifuge. And we always talk about this to people at the bar. Think of a washing machine. It's the same principle as what he's just talking about, except for you're not removing the liquid at that point, like in this centrifuge. You're keeping it and it's clarified in the middle. But think about using a washing machine. The outside, the solids are collected. That's your clothing, except for our centrifuge just doesn't have an option to get the water out of it. So at the end of the day, it's the exact same balance.
Also, I should say that although I sell centrifuges, and I want you to buy them because that, yes. But the centrifuge is 100% necessary for spinning alcohol. If you're doing non-alcoholic drinks, there's almost always a non-centrifuge way to get out of it. It's just your yields aren't going to be as good, and it's more of a pain in the ass, and the flavor is slightly different. Anytime you clarify something, like I say, you're stripping flavor out. So the question is, what flavors are you stripping out? Centrifuge is the least aggressive way to strip flavors out. Using agar, which I don't know if anyone actually wants to talk about it, but like agar is a more aggressive way of stripping flavors out. Egg whites, much more aggressive way of stripping flavors out. Milk punches is a relatively aggressive way to strip flavors out of things, and they won't clarify all fruits that way. You can get semi-clarified with doing old school milk punch techniques on juices. Those things are all more aggressive. So every clarification technique is more or less aggressive. We tend to do centrifuge because it tends to be the least aggressive on flavor.
So real quick, the way that most of the clarification we do, we are going to be clarifying something that is a fruit generally, maybe a vegetable. What you want to do is you want to remove pectin. So we use something called Pectinex, and then we add a couple of wine and beer finding agents. If you're going to be doing this, you're going to buy one of these. It's called a micropipette. It makes it real easy to dose small amounts of stuff. When you add these things, here's an example of what it may look like. So Dave, what do we got here? On the far left, you've got straight lime juice. Is this?
Yeah.
Straight lime juice, and then the pectin is it's like the thing that it's in jams and jellies and in fruits that makes it kind of like Jello. It gets in the way of the particulates and keeps it suspended. So in the first one, you see the juice, all the particulates are suspended all throughout. In the next one, you add the Pectinex. It's an enzyme. Think of it as scissors that specifically only cut the pectin, and so that allows the particles to fall down a little bit more just by gravity. And then we've added here Kisosol. Kisosol is a wine finding agent. It's a suspended silica. It basically, imagine throwing a magnet in there, and it makes, I can never remember which one is positive or negative, but imagine throwing like a positive thing in there, and so all the negative things stick to it. The next thing is chitosan. Chitosan is generally derived from shellfish, but there's a fungal derived that you can buy on Modernist Pantry, and you throw that in there. It's adding the next, so if the first one was positive, the next one is negative. It makes all the other things glom together. So you can see in that second to last one, the top of it is very clear, right? By making all the positive and negative things glom together using the wine finding agents. And that final one is, then if you ran it through a centrifuge, the centrifuge is just amplifying the effect of gravity, so you're forcing all the particulates to get smashed down together, and so now it's just stuck on the very bottom like that.
Right. Now, so real quickly, let's say you're not going to buy a centrifuge. Listen, if you're going to play the non-alc game in a hardcore way, right, you can use commercially clarified juices. You don't have to use juices at all, but if you're really going to get into it, I do suggest you learn how to clarify. If you don't want to get into the centrifuge, and you're not going to learn today, right, but it takes a while, it takes some practice. Go back to that one. If you look at when we're at work, right, the last one and the second to last one, the part that's clear, I'll use the more polite term, urine clear. The reason we call it urine, well, we use pee, but anyway, but the reason we call it that clear is because we're talking about clear, not colorless, right? So we want to emphasize clear. Let me go back to that. So the one in the middle if you weren't going to use a centrifuge, right, that's just after you've added the enzyme and the first finding agent and the second finding agent. That's where Don said the plus and the minus are stuck together, and that stuff drops hard. See how hard that drops? So you could probably get 66 to 75% of that lime juice on a straight rack. You know when I say racking, what I mean is you're just dumping the product off, right? You could get it, but it's not like super duper clear. We add another set of wine finding agents and it clumps together so hard that the stuff that settles out is clear, but now your yield is garbage. That's why the centrifuge, in the long run, if you're just gonna do this once or twice, yeah, sure, rack it off. You're gonna be throwing away like half your product, right? But the centrifuge gets it better. But you can, in fact, if you look at the third tube, if that's acceptably clear to you, which I hope it is not, then you can test that kind of stuff without a centrifuge.
You could also use one of these to if you don't want to buy a centrifuge, but you can only do a certain volume at a time. It's also a pain in the ass, and it's just not as nice.
I don't know how many of you give a crap. How many of you are going to try just racking and clarifying without a centrifuge? Any of you? Okay, another tip is do not use square vessels. Never use a square vessel. You already heard this. People have already heard me say this. If you pick up a square vessel and you move it, the liquid as it spins will destroy itself. Only ever use round vessels, and nothing with a dimply bottom in it. Like something that has something where the vessel can rotate around without disturbing the stuff that's compacting on the bottom. And don't pull it out of the walk-in to work on it. Literally just take your second vessel, dump it, put it back. And go high, don't go wide and shallow, go high and narrow, right?
Yeah. Before I ever had a centrifuge too, I was using these techniques, and the Spinzall does have a parcel pump on it. I did not have a centrifuge, but I did make like a little mini aquarium pump. I would just dip it down in there, pump off the top, and then when they got really close to it, I would let it settle one more time and run it through a coffee filter a couple times, and the yield was pretty good.
So you're going to be served two versions of the same drink. The first one is intentionally bad.
I say bad, not as good.
Not as good. It's not the way we serve it. We're showing you why we do the things we do to make it better. So, again, we have this crazy thing that I don't suggest you do, where we want every drink to come from out in the world inspired by something.
That's one more thing about the serendipity?
Yeah. So, yes.
Right. One more thing about the serendipity, this is Bobby's combination. Literally, like we had passion fruit and tomato, and he was like, "I'm going to make something with these." I was like, "What are you crazy?" And we all loved it. But then I was just thinking about it literally today. We haven't spoken about this before. I think one of the reasons it's so good is because the mix of those things doesn't taste like any fruit juice you've had. So it doesn't just seem like a concoction of fruit juices thrown together. Do you know what I'm saying? And I think one of the challenges in making a non-alc, especially like this one that Bobby made, is that if the guests taste something and they're like, "Oh, that's just some tropical fruit mix. I know what that tastes like." This is not something that they know what it tastes like ahead of time.
Yeah, and one last thing to just kind of touch on, you see Goya and Campbell up there. One of the things about consistency, especially in like a high volume bar that we have, it'd be lovely to get cases of passion fruit, juice them fresh, and then clarify them. The same with tomatoes, but unfortunately there's a season for everything and there's availability issues, so it is not a bad thing. I mean, we use Goya frozen passion fruit, and it is consistent, it's always great. Campbell's the same way. I mean, there's a serial number on the back of the bottle that tells you they can and they make this juice at peak season, and you can get a whole lot of the same material. So it's easier to keep the consistency of the product.
Yeah, if I lived in Colombia, yeah, I would use fresh passion fruit. You know what I mean? But the other thing is that we actually we bought the Goya passion fruit and we made the drink because that's what they had at my local fine fair, which is like a Key Foods, or I don't know what they call it.
Supermarket.
Yeah, well, but not like supermarket, like supermarket. You know what I mean? And
Price Chopper.
Yeah.
Piggly Wiggly.
I don't know
I'm just naming like regional supermarkets.
Yeah, but the thing is that the drink worked. And then we went and we're like, okay, now we're going to source really fancy, expensive. We tried Boiron, we tried Perfect Puree. Problem when you buy those kinds of purees is they add a lot of sugar to brix them up because pastry chefs are using them. You you should try as often as you can to get un-Brix adjusted, we'll talk about Brix later, unsugared adjusted purees, because it's going to give you a lot more wiggle room in your specs later on. So we tried these ones that cost like 4 times as much, and the drink just wasn't as good. So like something that costs more doesn't make it better in your application. So don't be like, oh, I'm only going to use this. If you use the expensive one and it's worse, why use it?
Especially if you're going to be doing this style of drinks, even in the non-alcoholic space. Boron and Perfect Puree, if you ask the rep, and you might be able to find it online, they have charts of exactly what the acidity and the sugar content of all their purees are. So you can reverse engineer, Dave Arnold style charts of exactly how much sugar is in it, and then adjust the amount of simple syrup or whatever additional sugar you're adding to it. So look up those charts if you're going to be doing that.
We're going to talk more about sugar later, right?
Yes.
One last thing on tomato juice. If you're going to use tomato juice in non-alc, I never used to buy, at Booker and Dax, my old bar, we had clarified tomato on the menu, and I was like, you're going to buy we started with grape tomatoes, and we were doing our own clarification. And not only was it horribly inconsistent, but even when it was consistent, the product was worse. It just was worse. Even though those grape tomatoes were the best, like tasting tomatoes that I could get on a consistent basis, or like Campari's off season. By the way, in New York, I have access to really freaking good tomatoes. So like, don't be like, well, you live in a different place. Nah, I can get really, really good tomatoes. But in order to get a quality of clarified juice as high as you can get by just buying the Campbell's, you buy the plastic one so it doesn't have any metallic taste to it. In order to get that quality, you would also need to put it through a strainer to get rid of the seeds and the skins beforehand, as though you were making like tomato juice, which very rarely we don't have that kind of workflow capacity, so we were just blending it. So unless you're willing to go full on and make tomato juice, Campbell's is going to do a better job.
Okay, so this next drink you're having, this is a drink that was inspired by Dave Arnold. You're writing an article originally?
I don't remember. Wait, you got the one that's bad doesn't say good on it.
Pro tip. So, Dave, as you can imagine, goes down rabbit holes. There's never been a rabbit he hasn't chased, to my knowledge. And at one point, he got obsessed with the Melipona bee. So,
It's a super cool story. A non-alc. So, one thing we didn't tell you. At our bar, we charge the same amount of money for a non-alcoholic drink as we charge for an alcoholic drink, $16. Do you know who's complained about it? Booze drinkers. We haven't had a lot of people who don't drink alcohol come in and complain about the cost of the non-alcoholic drinks. And it's because I think at least our clientele are happy that we respect them, right? As people enough to, and Don also didn't say this, I don't think, maybe he did, that we spend a lot of money and time on our non-alcs, and so in general our pour costs on our non-alcs are as high as our pour costs, if not higher than the pour costs on the alcs. The sourcing that we have to do on them and the amount of work per drink is in general much higher. And people don't begrudge us that because they see it as a sign of respect, and you're respecting them as a person. We want someone to come in and to feel like we care about them as much if they order this or as if they order an alcoholic. And I think the vast majority of people who don't drink get that. Occasionally, you'll get someone who's just a designated driver, and maybe they won't understand it. But in general, they drink alcohol, right? And so, I'm sorry, they're not who I care about in this situation. You know what I mean? Like, so, I think it's hard. I don't know if you can do it in every market, but in our market, you can. I feel a little bad that we don't carry like standard sodas. The only Coke we have in the house is for Don's, old rum and Coke drink, because Coke is delicious, but we don't carry it as a made product. So there are some people who get bent. That's very rare.
I mean, the idea too is like, think about how the cocktail bar has evolved, and think about when you invite someone over your home. Back in the day, of course, having soda around for someone was like, you're a non-alcoholic drinker, here's a Diet Coke. But as the cocktail bars evolved, there's classics going to like modern-age cocktails, reinventing classics. So, there's a second wave of non-alcoholic stuff come around, and the people that come and drink those is like, oh, great, another strawberry, blueberry, it's like, had about 50 variations of this, it sucks. So now we're in that third phase, where it's like, you don't stock Diet Coke for your friend that, doesn't drink anymore at your house, you're trying to make them a little something. And now you're coming to a bar and you're gonna pay $16. It better be a fucking really good, thoughtful drink.
Right, and I've seen on many occasions at very good bars in multiple countries, bartenders make non-alcs and trash talk the non-alc while they were making it to other guests across the bar, and it's a freaking nightmare. It's a nightmare, right? Like, it's already enough of a hurdle to get someone who doesn't drink to come in and enjoy your space as a community space, okay? Don't belittle it, you know what I mean? Our chef appreciates it, he doesn't drink, you know?
So if you haven't heard it before, in the same way that you have like third wave coffee, what we're trying to do, you know, philosophically is third wave non-alcoholic drinks. The first being if you were Lenny Briscoe on Law & Order and you drank club soda in a bar, in a dive bar, that was the first. The second was the fact that if you went to a classic, you know, fancy cocktail bar, you could essentially have some version of a lemonade, because that's really all that the bartenders were capable of making, given what they had. And so now we're trying to intentionally, thoughtfully create something that cannot be made on the fly, because it takes time, technique, all these different things to make that even better non-alcoholic drink.
And before this one that you're tasting dies, let me just tell you what you're supposed to be tasting, and then we can talk about it later when it comes up. So we hope that when you taste the one not labeled good, by the way, this is honey. This is a honey. We're talking about a honey drink. The one that is not labeled good should taste a little thin to you, right? It should just taste a little thin. And the one that is labeled good, and I didn't even trust myself, so I added a little more than I should have. It's a little sweeter, I think, than we do at the bar. We'll keep it sweeter a little bit. We'll talk about that later. But if that one is just bigger, rounder, more real, right? And that is because we use the secret weapon that we're going to talk about later. Now, back to what Don wanted me to talk
It's
about.
not a secret because I put it on the screen.
All right, but back to what Don wanted me to talk about, which is one way to get people interested is only the flavor, but to show that they're getting something they can't get somewhere else. So like unobtainium is a way to do it, and a good story. So this honeybee has an amazing story. So the Melipona honeybee is a stingless, no sting, that's the name of the drink, honeybee that is native to the Yucatan, or, parts of Mexico, Guatemala, all around there. There's actually several different stingless honeybees that are native to that region. When they introduced, by the way, another cool story, the only bees in the world that can pollinate vanilla orchids are the Melipona honeybees, right? And interestingly, so vanilla, people have been using vanilla in Mexico and Guatemala since forever, right? And then Europeans, when they showed up, tried to take vanilla because they knew it was an important crop and tried to cultivate it everywhere, and it never worked because no one ever bothered to study the system in which it grew. And it was only when a slave on the island of Madagascar discovered how to hand sex vanilla orchids that vanilla industry in Madagascar in particular became a worldwide industry. Of course, he got nothing out of it, and Madagascar became what it was in terms of vanilla production. So this Melipona honeybee and the vanilla orchid, vanilla in general, have been linked since before there were people, right? It's like an evolutionary thing. So right there, good story. Another thing is this is an endangered honeybee, because another thing that Europeans brought with them was the European honeybee. The European honeybee is what's called a generalist. It will come to your house and eat all of your nectar, right? And it will eat any kind of nectar. It doesn't care what you like, right? The Melipona honeybees are not generalists, so they tend to get out-competed by European honeybees. And I love honeybees. Everyone that loves honeybees, regular honeybees, European honeybees, they are incredibly problematic all over the world when they're put in situations where they don't belong, because they wipe out, other animals and other insects and other, frankly, non-insects that need certain kinds of nectar to survive. So they're not all a warm and fuzzy proposition with European honeybee. So people who live down there and have lived down there have always cultivated these Melipona hives. They're becoming harder and harder to get because it's harder and harder to keep them. The bee is incredibly rare. The belief is that this honey has curative properties, so the locals would never think that regular honey from a European honeybee has any good curative properties, but I don't believe in curative properties, by the way. I don't believe but the people there do, so it adds to the story. So it's incredibly expensive honey that when you buy it by the gram on eBay here because you believe it has health benefits, it's like super expensive. It's completely unobtainium to use in cocktails. So we found, Carlos actually was working with us, found a source of a guy who would illegally ship us like 3 kilos of Melipona honey. It is still fantastically expensive, right? But yeah, so he shipped it up, and that's basically the story. So here we're giving you
thousands of dollars.
Yes, thousands of dollars. And Don, true to Don form, if you don't know Don, who's like super aggro, is that this is only going into non-alcs. And people were like, but can I get that alcohol? No, because it's part of the respect we're paying, not just to the drink, but to the, if you want to experience this is a non-alcoholic experience.
You can have any other honey cocktail drink in the world. We really want you to taste the Melipona honey, and we don't want to hide it behind a gin. We don't want it to become a bee's knees. We don't need to sell you a $40 bee's knees. We really want, for that person who comes in who's not having alcohol, to have something special that is unobtainium that you can't have. This is the equivalent of, some Mizunara, like crazy, Japanese unobtainium whiskey, but in the non-alcoholic setting.
Should we talk about sugar? It's also not the same. So, who's not familiar with the term Brix? Okay, so Brix, simply put, is just the percentage weight of something that is sugar. So if you have a kilo of something and it's 50 Brix, then 500 grams of that is sugar. Okay? And since we're talking non-alcs, I don't have to give you my standard warning, which is you can't measure Brix if you also have alcohol in your system or anything else really that's dissolved. But so we're talking about Brix. If you're going to play, honey typically is 82 Brix. European honeybee honey is about 82 Brix.